Expanded symmetries on triangle tilings are basically a shortcut, an easy button to start designing your own patterns and then folding them the easy way. So hi, I'm Madonna from Gathering Folds, and today I'm going to be talking about expanded symmetries on triangle tilings. I have some examples here in front of me, and fair warning, I came up with 4 of these different expanded symmetries this morning. I'd already been familiar with another 4 symmetries on the equilateral triangle tiling, but couldn't sleep last night and figured out a couple more. So all of these finished tessellations are in the same expansion, which I call cluster 4. It's called cluster 4 because we have a group of 4 twists that go together that are each connected. So we've got a central twist and a corner twist. Now I say a corner twist when there's 3 of them because I only have one choice. So if I want this cluster to be centered around a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry, so I can turn it 3 times, spaced evenly around, and get the same result, also known as turn 120 degrees each time, and be able to see the same thing. Also look in 3 equally spaced directions and see the same thing. Then I need to make the same choice outside of the central triangle on all 3 corners of the cluster. And these cluster 4 tessellations, this way of viewing the tiling, has 2 clusters. It has a cluster with a right-handed central twist and a cluster with a left-handed central twist. And these pair up together. In this case, actually in the case of all of the tessellations we'll be looking at just now, I have a cluster on the front and a cluster on the back. And this lets me pack many, many twists into a dense arrangement that you don't necessarily have in other ways of making new designs easily. So the other prominent way to make a new design easily is just add more space in certain directions between the existing twist, the existing pattern twists. But here, we're able to fit things more densely together, not less. So what I've got going on here is the same cluster, this open surrounded by 3 closed, on both sides of the paper. And so, okay, I've got the same cluster on both sides. Definitely in that case, the pleats are going to match. And my pleats coming out of this cluster of 4 triangles, there's 2 pleats, 1 from each corner twist, whereas the central twist has all 3 of its pleats taken up by those 3 corners. So whatever pleats are coming out are going to be in the same orientation because I'm going to have the same handedness of twist for all of my corner twists in a given cluster. And that means that the spacing between them needs to match whatever twist is on the front versus whatever twist is on the back. And that's easiest to do if you just have the same cluster. Now, if I have open triangle surrounded by closed triangles, well, why not closed triangle surrounded by open? And that's what I do in emergent hexagons. That last piece, by the way, was stars and stars. And so I've got closed surrounded by open on both sides in the densest possible arrangement of clusters. And by the way, these clusters, you can space them further apart or closer together. The pattern, the symmetries don't care. And I had mentioned that there's 3-fold rotationally symmetric positions in the center of clusters. There's also a threefold position in the center of a loop of 6 clusters. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clusters around this central point. And since they're alternating front and back, then I get 3 repetitions all the way around. So these threefold rotational asymmetric points put me solidly in the triangle symmetry. And that's what I'm trying to maintain, especially in the equilateral triangle tiling. Moving onwards, we can have clusters where the twists are not on the same side too. So here I have an open triangle surrounded by 3 closed triangles on the opposite side. And then I repeat that on the back, so open on the other side, 3 closed triangles on this side. And just to show it's the same again on the other side. And I can also mix and match clusters. As long as those spacings between the corner twist pleats, those parallel pleats, are the same for both of my clusters, they can pair up and make new patterns. So here I have closed surrounded by 3 opens on one side, and open surrounded by 3 closed on the other. And my advanced twist technique students have seen I have a whole file of all of the different clusters. There's like 13 of them, I want to say, just with closed and open triangle twists close together or obscenely close together. I like to have fun when I name these techniques. So that's clustering 4, but you can also cluster 6, you can cluster 9, you can use clusters of 4 in different ways. So when I first was dealing with these, I was like, okay, I had just had the light bulb moment of you can do this on the square tiling, which I already have a video for, and I was like, okay, can I do this on equilateral triangles? And the answer was yes. I can take this maximum symmetry where every twist is the same, you're just mirroring everywhere, and then you have threefold rotation in the center of each loop of 6, and then break that down. Then you don't have the mirrors anymore, you just have the alternating that still is in the same density of symmetry. Then you can break that down further. You can do the clusters of 4 with or without mirrors. If you do them with mirrors, you're going to have more space in between. And I'm sure I've done a video with a tessellation with clusters of 4 triangles mirrored. I've also done one with clusters of 4 triangles alternating the clusters front and back. What I want to explore today, and actually what I didn't realize before, is that this tessellation, I was thinking of it as clusters of 6 and then 1 left out. And then that goes into other clusters of 6. But that's actually the same symmetry as these clusters of 4. Now, there is a way to do clusters of 6, and it's done with spacing. So you have 2 choices of twist. You have an A and a B, and you can alternate, and these can be like the same twist, just right and left hand versions, or they can be different twists, they can be on opposite sides, and then you can add space around these clusters of 6 to create different effects with the pattern. And so I'm planning a advent of tessellations this year, and the first 2 of the first 4 patterns are in this cluster 6 style. The other 2 of the first 4 are in cluster 4. So the ones I figured out earlier this morning, what got me up out of bed at 2:30 in the morning this morning, was seeing, oh, actually, I can have 3 clusters of 4 around a single twist and get my symmetries that way. That's what I have with this Sierpinski type tessellation. I can also have these clusters of 4 around a cluster of 6. So that's a fun one. And from what I've seen, if you need to have certain conditions met, and so I'm using the same clusters on opposite sides. I could also do different clusters with the same spacing. It wouldn't make a difference. And then some kind of alternation of twists in the center loop. So that's what we're going to fold today. But there's more options too. We can also have 3 different sizes of triangle clusters. We can have clusters of 9 triangles. We can really go wild with this. Any group of triangles that has a triangle outline, you can take and depending on how those pleats are organized, you can flip it front and back. So if I have just 2 choices of twist internally with the same on the border, then I can flip that front and back. And if I make 3 different choices, and I've got a maximum of 3 different potential positions in this block, if I want to keep the block 3-fold rotationally symmetric, then I'm down to mirror symmetry only. So let's jump into what the heck it looks like to have clusters of 4 triangles around these hexagonal structures, which are in turn composed of triangles. So let's grab our pattern here, and I'll get the diagrams out of the way. And in this pattern, we have a central loop. Put that towards the center of your screen. And we have alternation inside that loop from closed triangles on the front to closed triangles on the back. Then out from those structures, I'm taking the cluster on the opposite side of whatever the central twist was. Zoom in a bit. And I've got a cluster of 4 closed triangles as dense together as they can be. Then I have that same cluster on the front side coming off of the triangle on the back from that central cluster. So let's start folding. I've got just basically a 32-fold short edge aligned triangle grid on a random piece of paper, a random rectangle. It's the rectangle that's left once you cut a square out of a 19 by 12.5 inch piece of skytone. But really, the important thing here is to have any triangle grid. You don't need to exactly match what I'm doing to be able to follow the ideas. So let's find the center here, because I do want to have it centered just for self-consistency. And I'm folding the paper in half on the edge parallel direction. Then if I can't visually pinpoint the center, I'll fold and not crease, just recognize where that position is and then mark it. So here I've got the center of my paper. This is going to be this point in the center of my tessellation. Going out from here, I need to find where to put my first twist. I'm not going to do all 6 of these out from the center at once. And I need to find where this grid intersection is and how this twist is rotating. So it just so happens that I have a left-handed twist on the front. I usually start with right-handed twists, but it's not a big deal. So I'm going to find my center, have my center. I've got my grid lines. aligned vertically, just like the crease pattern. And I'm going to find this fold, which is going to continue out another spacing. So what I did is I went 2 grid spacings out to the upper left, and I know that there's this alternating mountain and valley regular hexagon with 2 grid spacings on each edge around my center point. So I'm marking those 2 grid spacings and 1 more to get to the center of my triangle. Likewise with my valley, I can mark my blue line, and then my mountain fold is going to be 1 spacing away from my valley because we're using single depth plates. And I can then go in, I have my target grid intersection, and I have the valley, which tells me which way to rotate. I'm going to go ahead and set up this twist and squash. And I should mention, I have not folded this pattern before. I do not anticipate that that will be a problem. I designed it this morning. Not because I have a lack of triangle patterns with extended symmetries, but just because it was the latest shiny object to go through my head. So from here, I'm going to flip my paper over, and it's very clear on this grid where the center is relative to my twist. So I know, for example, that this short pleat going to the edge is not involved in this central loop of 6. So next, I have a lot of experience with this kind of start, so I know that the center of my next twist is going to need to be 2 out from the closed hole. But if I don't have that experience, how can I tell? Well, it goes back to what I said about there being 2 spacings on the alternating mountain and valley folds around the central hexagon. So my fold goes all the way up in here. So there's an extra spacing in there, 1 more, and then I reach the corner of my twist. And I need another one to reach the center. So I'm going to go ahead and fold that twist and squash. And I'm going to do the same thing for my other long diagonal plate. I'm going to come 2 out from the closed hole, set up my closed triangle twist, and squash. Now I've run out of twists to fold in the central loop on this side because everything's coming from a neighbor on the opposite side in this loop of 6. So I will flip over and do the same thing on this side. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're folding your pleats, folding your twists, there's these 2 parallel pleats, and I like to think of them as stair steps. And so I'm coming from the bottom, stepping up, stepping up. I want to start generally at the top of the stairs whenever I have these parallel pleats. And I'm going to have an upper twist, and there are multiple ways to do this. I'm just showing how someone a little more beginner would approach this. And when you're starting out with tessellations, you want to get your twist squashed as quickly as possible. You want to avoid setting up a lot of things at the same time. You want to avoid second guessing. So next I've got another twist to set up on this other parallel pleat. I know it needs to be centered right here at this grid intersection, because that's 2 spacings out from my closed hole. But when I open my pleat overlap and go to put that in, I have a little bit of a problem because this is causing another pleat overlap. Sorry, it's causing another 3-way intersection, 1 spacing from where I want to squash my twist. Now, this doesn't have to be a problem. I can lay things down so I can squash this twist. But then I'm left to dig out what's going on with that other pleat. I still need a closed triangle on the other side. And the easier way to do that is, before I've squashed anything, I take a look at the existing pleat and recognize which way this is going to turn. This is going to be a left-handed twist. So the valley here is going to need to come through on this side of this mountain, not the other side. And what I'm going to do is break this mountain at the valley. Let the valley pass through until it meets the existing valley, and let those carry on together, setting up the closed triangle on the other side, and just laying that down flat. This is called a triangle wrap, and then squashing my triangle twist on this side before returning to the opposite side and squashing that twist. So we need the crease pattern for one more measurement, which is how far are these cluster twists from the central twists? And the answer is 1 grid spacing. The corner of this will come to the center of that for each of these 6. And that's enough to get us going and remove any doubt about what's going on next. So I'm going to start on the side that I landed on. I've got 1 grid spacing before the corner, a 2nd before the center. My 1 spacing before the corner is already tucked under the pleat. This is important to recognize because you can end up changing the spacing, and in this particular arrangement, you can't really arbitrarily add space between the loop of 6 and the clusters. Also take note of what I said earlier, that the corner of one twist is going to end up in the center of the other. So I know I just need to go 1 spacing out. To put in my next twist. And I know that this twist is in the corner of a cluster of 4 twists. How do I know which of these pleats goes to the center? Well, it's going to be the one that is not in, well, okay. Here's where some experience and intuition is coming in, but also I can say, well, I just need to get more of these in and it will become clear. But what my intuition is telling me is that this pleat is going to go to the center. And that's partially picking up on things from the crease pattern and partially seeing like how things have to be in order to get more twists around this center. So if I was putting the center over here, I would end up with another closed triangle in here, and then stuff would start bunching in together. So my center is actually out here. And I'm at the top of a set of stairs, so I'm going to just go ahead and fold that center. And when I fold the other corner, I'm going to go ahead and use a triangle wrap running that valley through the mountain all the way to the next valley, because I know that the start of the next cluster is going to be on the other side. So then I'll flip over so this twist is easy to open and go ahead and squash it. Here I only have one choice for where to put the center of the cluster because these two are occupied. So coming back without the crease pattern now, we're going to simply propagate this out and see what happens. So coming around to the pleat I was just working with, I'm going to set up my twist and squash it. Then this central twist of the cluster is going to have a new twist over here, and I'm going to set up the wrap even before I'm setting up my initial twist and lay that down in place, and then flip over, squash the twist, and I'm going to exactly repeat what I did in those last few steps. On the only pleat remaining available to work on, I'm going to put another twist to make the center of the cluster, just like the cluster I had on the other side. Then forming a corner, I'm going to open my pleat overlap, set up the triangle wrap first. And this is the part where it's a good thing that you're watching the recording, because this is going, you know, at a fairly rapid pace. So I've got the triangle wrap, I'll flip over and resolve that. And bring up the center of the cluster. Before bringing up the next corner and setting up the following triangle wrap. So once you understand setting up the closed triangle twist on the front and setting it up on the back, it becomes much more straightforward to start playing with these expanded symmetries, whether you're throwing in some open triangles in the mix or not. And this is very much a practice piece. If I was doing this for a full scale display piece like those ones that I showed earlier, I would be using a rotated grid on a hexagon to get the repeats aligned with the edge. Then flipping over here, I'm coming to the final two twists of this loop around. And these two are both, so I've got my pleat overlap, I'm opening the pleat overlap, they're both on the same side, because they're the center and corner of this cluster. And I'm going to squash that, then squash the other, and I've got a loop around in my tessellation. Then I'm going to need to do the next loop, and I may as well start at the top of a set of stairs. I'm going to do this one for clarity of seeing that it is stairs. I could have also chosen this set or this set, and I'm going to complete the cluster. So completing the cluster, leads to setting up a pleat overlap, which means that I'm going to need 2 twists to resolve this. One thing that I know is that this point here is the center of a cluster on the other side. It's threefold rotationally symmetric, and so there's a closed twist on this side at the closed hole, one out from the center. That also needs to be true over here. And I'll zoom in just a smidge. So while I'm on this side, I'm going to go ahead, set up the wrap, set up the twist. And I'm basically just staying on the same side for as long as possible. Then I'll flip over, resolve my closed triangle that I'd set up with the wrap. Then start at the top of the stairs, and I know now I'm back into the central loop of 6. So I've got a cluster that's about to be finished over here. I've got a twist that needs to be on this pleat, 2 spacings out from the closed hole because that was the rule around this loop of 6. And I'm going to start showing a little bit more advanced way to set these twists up. So when I set up one, I'm not running the pleat all the way through anymore. Instead, I'm just running it until it would run into the valley of the next twist. And setting up that wrap so I can do multiple at a time. Then that next twist, I'm not running all the way through either. I'm running the mountain until it would run into the valley of the following twist. And so in these loops, I have alternation front and back wherever I'm working on the twists. And I can set up all of the twists in the edge at a time and go ahead and squash them all without flipping the paper over between each one. Then when I do flip, I can easily open and squash each of those twists, which then brings me around to the next edge. And here I'm really close to the edge of the paper, so I'm only going to be able to get the twists on 2 of these pleats, and one of those is going to be partial. So we don't have the pleats overlapping, so we can't form the next twist on the back here. Again, if I was doing a display piece, I would use a triangle grid on a hexagon so I can work evenly around. Let's see. The next stuff going on here, I'm going to need to finish this cluster. And I'm going to need a loop of 6 twists close in to the cluster that's on the other side. And I can squash each of those, taking care because I'm at the edge. And then I'll flip over to resolve this triangle. Just want to be very careful with it because I am so close to the edge. And I can continue with the next set of parallel pleats. So I'm going to need a twist. These 2, this one on this side and the one on the other side, are already in my loop of 6. So I'm going to stay with the loop of 6 rule of 2 out from the closed hole. Then I need to finish the cluster with a twist that is right next to the center. And my next twist here is going to be starting a loop of 6 from a cluster on the other side, so that's a close spacing there as well. And I could be doing this just like I had been in the center, where I'm doing one twist at a time. But I wanted to show you how I would personally go about folding this. And you can see that I'm not having trouble folding this, even though I designed it this morning and I didn't do a test fold beforehand. I'm simply following the symmetries and following the tiling breaks, and it doesn't matter to me if I've folded something before. I can still fold it now. So then here I've got that center or around the loop of 6 twist. Again, it's not going to cause a pleat overlap, so I may as well go ahead and squash it. Then partial twist like we saw on the other side. And I'm just working my way around here. Now I'm out to just the edges, and I'm gonna need, let's see. So that one started a new cluster on the back side. This one is going to be in that loop of 6. I can take this pleat that's going a different direction than the rest of these and put in my new twist, continuing around the loop of 6 that we had in the center. And then this is going to be a cluster, but we're going to start at the top of the stairs. This is loops of 6. My next twist on here is on the back. So I actually am going to start with my cluster here. And this is going to cause 2 twists in the cluster before I get an overlap to set up that twist in the back. These I can squash one at a time, and then I'll flip over. And that was a really arbitrary decision for me on how to start working with that set of pleats. Sometimes it's just pretty random. So from here, I've got this closed hole down here. I need my next center of a twist out here because I'm in that loop of 6. And I'm going to set up the triangle wrap to close the loop of 6. So notice these triangles are spaced further out. I'm also noticing this cluster leading to one of the triangles on the back side, which is what tipped me off that this was the loop of 6 instead of clusters waiting to happen. And I can flip back over and squash that twist. And if I really want to, I can do partial twists around the edge. I'm going to need a partial here. And this is going to lead to a twist on the opposite side. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that. And so this is another loop of 6. I'm going to flip. This one actually is starting a new cluster. So it's perfectly fine that it's so close in to the loop of 6. And I technically could put a partial twist on this little itty bitty bit right there, but I'm not going to because that's more mess than it's worth. And then I've also got a partial twist I can put in right here to start the next cluster close into that loop of 6. And why not? And coming around to this side, I can see this is one of my loops of 6. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did with the other side, set up my twist 2 spacings out from the closed hole. Then I've got all of my twists on this side. I'm going to flip over, or I'm going to start with the pleat that needs more twists on this side. This one is very close to a twist in that central loop of 6. So it's going to be a cluster, and I can do these either one at a time or more at a time. It doesn't matter. I'm going to end up with a triangle wrap after I've done 2 twists in this cluster. And for completeness, I may as well finish out the cluster while I'm here and set up the wrap for a twist on the other side. And then flipping over, I'll resolve all of my wraps. And by the way, I went ahead and resolved that whole cluster because I'm right at the edge of the paper, and so it doesn't matter as much if I stick to the tiling breaks or not. In general, you want to do just 1 ring of twists at a time. And squashing. This one's in a loop of 6, so it's going to have a cluster right away on the other side. Okay, so that's my tessellation. As far as practice pieces go, this was very informative in telling me what the broader structure is going to look like, and also what the loop structure is going to be in this arrangement. So the loop structure with the clusters of 4 that are alternating, or even the clusters of 4 that are mirrored, is you start loops in one, you start clusters in one loop, and then you finish them in the next loop. And then you start new clusters in the following loop, and then you finish them in the next loop. And this loop structure seems to be a little more complicated. I'm doing the central loop of 6, and then I start clusters, and then I finish clusters in a loop that is alternating sides, which gets me into the start of the next central loops of 6, which I then finish in the next loops out while starting new clusters. And so what I'm noticing here is I'm going to always have to pay attention to what's the loop of 6, what's the cluster, and how are these playing together. Because it's not as straightforward as, okay, I finish the cluster on this side, then I go finish the cluster on that side, then I go finish the cluster on the front side again. It's more of a give and take in the folding, but still not too terribly complicated. And so there's a lot of patterns, and like I was showing you earlier with this Sierpinski type pattern, these are 2 brand new patterns that I discovered this morning that use only closed triangle twists. There's so much out there to be discovered, and it doesn't have to be that hard. These tessellations do not need to take up all of your time. They don't need to be conceptually extremely difficult. They don't need to be extremely difficult to fold to be new. And I mean, for me, figuring out something and then folding it, making it real, realizing it in the paper is just one of the biggest rushes that I have. Pretty much about as good as singing in a choir. So this is just, I mean, expanded symmetries on triangle tilings. This is the easy button for getting started with your own designs. And if you're inside of advanced twist techniques, I've got template files to make that even easier. And further explanations on how to make that super easy. So with that, I hope y'all have a great day and fold lots of grid and lots of triangle twists. Hopefully you can replicate this pattern and maybe do it on a different grid, have a different outline. And I'd love to see it. If you do, tag me at Gathering Folds, wherever you choose to post, and I'll get to see it. All right, so happy folding, y'all.